Hi, Women of Welcome. I'm Brianna Stensrud, and today we're going to be talking with Jen Podkul, who is the VP of Policy at KIND, which is Kids in Need of Defense. And we're going to be talking about some hard but really good things that we need to know about. And so we really hope you'll stay tuned with us today. So for those of you who are new to Women of Welcome, we are a Christian community of women pursuing compassion and Christ-like welcome towards immigrants and refugees. And you're invited to join us on Facebook and on Instagram at Women of Welcome. And for those of you who are looking for a specific safe place to ask sincere questions and to dive in more and learn with other women in the same space, we do have a private Facebook group just for you. And you can find that at Women of Welcome on Facebook as well. So we encourage you to find us there and go deeper with our community and other like-minded women. So today we are going to be covering a couple big topics just so that we can figure out how we can enter in an effective way with Jen. And she's going to help us with that. We're going to talk about the ruling of children needing to be released. We saw an order a couple weeks ago from Judge Gee, who said that minor children needed to be released from detention. That deadline has passed. We're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about what is really happening with kids at the border and some of the really frightening stories we're hearing about kids being detained in some sort of shadow system in hotels in McAllen, Texas. And we're going to just get to the bottom of that. Jen, could you just real quickly let us know a little bit about KIND? What is it that you guys do? And as soon as you say what you do, then our community will definitely feel great about the fact that you're going to be informing us because you're actually working with these children.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Wayne. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here with your community. So Kids in Need of Defense, we've been around for about 11 years, and we were started by the Microsoft Corporation and Angelina Jolie. And the idea was, when unaccompanied kids come here, when kids come to the United States asking for protection without a parent or legal guardian, they have to go through the court process, just like adults do. And they're not given a lawyer by the government. They have to do it all by themselves. Maybe you've seen some of the articles about, 3-year-olds sitting, at the table in court. So what we do is we work with law firms and corporations, and we get attorneys to take these kids' cases for free. So we, interview the kids, we find them a lawyer to make sure that they have a lawyer accompany them so that they have a fair opportunity to tell their story and ask for protection from the U.S. government. We also run a return and reintegration program in Central America, both in Honduras and Guatemala. So for kids who decide that they no longer want to be here or they don't have to be here for safety reasons, maybe they came looking for educational opportunities or work opportunities, we help them go back to their home communities and make sure that they have what they need so that they can stay there.
Amazing, amazing. So I hope what you're hearing, ladies, is that Jen and her staff are uniquely qualified to speak into this and let us know what's going on the ground level so that we have accurate information. There's tons of headlines and stories, and some of them have different bents. And what we want to do is we want to get to the bottom so that we can know how to effectively enter in and be an advocate for these families. So let's first start just with this ruling from Judge Gee, who said that those families that have children who are detained here in the U.S., that those children needed to be released because they had been held way past immigration law agreements, the Flores agreement that said we are not going to be detaining minors longer than 20 days. And yet there was some confusion about that because she had said we need to release these children. And yet there was no clarity around would they be released by themselves or with their parents, without their parents. Can you give us a little bit of context of how we got to this point and why the judge felt like we really had to get this ruling done and why she did it? And then what's happened since Monday? Because Monday has come and gone, and wondering if kids actually have been released. What went down?
Sure. Look, this is so confusing. Even attorneys, we've all been kind of talking and trying to figure out what's going on because there's a couple different cases. So over 20 years ago, the government entered into agreement after being sued about the way they were holding kids, right? They were holding kids in terrible conditions. And so there was this big lawsuit. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It went back down, and there was a settlement where the government said, okay, anytime the federal government holds a child, we're going to meet these minimum standards. Make sure they have recreation, make sure they get meals and snacks, make sure they get screening. And so this has been the Flores settlement. So this has governed how the United States government has to hold children. About 5 or 6 years ago, the government reopened family detention facilities where they started holding kids with their families in immigration and customs enforcement facilities. So the Flores attorneys went back to the court and said, wait a minute, these are not licensed facilities. Normally the government, when you hold a kid, you have to put it in a licensed facility to make sure there's good oversight and that they're appropriate for kids. And the judge said that's right. When the government's holding kids in a family facility, so not the unaccompanied kids, but the kids who are with their parents, when they're in these unlicensed adult facilities, it's not appropriate for the government to keep them there for longer than 20 days. She said in about 20 days, the government should decide, are they going to release that family or are they going to remove that family? So you're not holding kids in these unlicensed facilities for 20 days. So generally, that's been what's happening. During COVID, and even a little bit before, the length of stay in these facilities was getting longer and longer and longer, especially because a lot of the rules about asking for asylum have changed in the past year. And so the attorneys went back to Judge G, and said, wait a minute, they're holding kids much longer for 20 days. And now with COVID, we're really worried about the health conditions. We really feel like it's important to get these kids out of detention right now. Now, the judge, she only had, because the lawsuit was only about kids, she only has the authority to make an order about kids, about releasing kids. So she said her only power is to say, yes, I think it's really dangerous for these kids to be in the facility, particularly now, and knowing how long they've been there, you need to release them. Now, the government, there's a different lawsuit about the parents, right? So what was happening is the government started saying to parents, look, you need to either waive your child's rights under Flores to be released and to be safe, or you're going to have to agree to separate from them. And we can't promise we'll ever put you back together again.
And this is when that we were talking about.
Exactly, right. So this is the binary choice. This is kind of the revival of family separation. We all thought this was a problem that had ended 2 years ago. Right. And so there was a lot of concern that they're reviving this. Now, a lot of people are saying, like, well, why doesn't ICE just release the whole family together, right? This is a family that's asking for asylum. They already have a lawyer. They're in the process. And that's exactly what KIND has been advocating for. We're not saying, just let them go, never seeing them again. What we're saying is they're already in a court process. They already have attorneys. Why don't you release them using one of your other community-based alternatives to detention program to make sure they're safe and that you're complying with the law, that one, you're not holding kids longer than you need to, but especially right now with the health crisis going on.
Right. Okay. So great, thorough explanation. Monday came and went. There was a deadline that was, okay, so Monday you have to release all of these children by Monday. And when we say release, help us understand what that means, because for those of us who don't know the whole process, you're thinking, well, where are they going to be released to? And during a health crisis, isn't that scary for U.S. citizens and immigrants alike, that they'd be released into an environment that they don't have the resources they need to stay healthy outside of facilities? So help us make the connection of when we say release, what does that mean? And then also help us know what happened since Monday, since that was the deadline.
So those are all great questions. So the majority of families, so the reason when somebody kind of leaves their country and flees, like anywhere else, they generally go to a place where they know somebody, right? So sometimes that's Mexico for a Central American. They might have connections. They certainly speak the language, right, in Mexico. Some kids and families end up coming to the United States because they have connections, support systems here. So these families can go to the home of somebody who they already know, who they already trust, so that they have the support that they need to continue with their immigration court process. So the idea being, they can go into somebody's home, which is going to be safer. They can quarantine there. They can get the services and the support that they need to make sure that they can keep going on with their case.
And so that's people have a sponsor family or a connection to a family that would be willing to take them in, right? That's the vast majority of them.
That's the vast majority of them, exactly.
Right.
And if there's not, the attorneys can work with and figure out what other community-based services could there be. Is it a shelter? Is it a group home? A welcoming a church? A lot of churches have been reaching out and supporting families. So whether it be supporting them while they stay in a hotel, while they quarantine, there's lots of different options in communities. A lot of groups who work on that specifically. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of what's happened since Monday. This is like the $1 million question, right? The judge said, I want these kids out of here by Monday. the government keeps saying like, well, we haven't really figured out how we're going to let the parents make the decision, this binary choice to separate or not. And so there's been this delay. And then there's this other court case about whether or not the parents should be released. So what's been happening is that judge has asked for kind of a priority list of which families really need to get out fast. Is it because they've already tested positive for COVID or they have particular vulnerabilities? So with that other judge, they're looking at how do you rank and prioritize which families would need to be released first. But I will say, there are lots of these community-based alternative to detention programs out there. There are lots of that have been, over 99% effective to make sure that people complete with the immigration court process. As an advocate for children and seeing what detention does to children, even without a global health pandemic, there's no reason why these kids and families have to sit and languish in detention centers. They should be in homes and in communities and in schools so that they can go through the process and have a fair opportunity. I think, advocating that kids be released from these family facilities is important, outside of this health crisis right now too.
And we have seen, some folks will say, we've talked about how there's been nearly 50 changes to immigration policy since January, really since kind of the start of COVID. And what we have seen is sometimes we get kind of a pushback. Well, this is all really happening just to preserve and keep you as citizens safe from COVID. And the government does have an obligation to prioritize the safety of U.S. citizens and whatnot. What would you say to that when, in light of all of this, when you think about how someone might not understand or be afraid of the fact that if an asylum seeker is released from detention testing positive for COVID, why that, you can see how they might be confused about why releasing someone with COVID out of a facility would be better than keeping someone in a facility. There's always this little question of, is that the best thing to do right now during COVID? Or are we seeing this be just really an excuse to put more restrictions, even just on legal processes that we have for vulnerable people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great question. So, the kind of universe of families that we're talking about right now with this family separation, it's about 300 people. So it's a very small group of people that we're talking about. Okay. And when I say release, it's not like, see you later, good luck,
right.
Hope things work out. It is, here are your requirements, here are your restrictions based on your specific situation. So is there a health concern? Is there a flight risk concern? Does the child have special needs, or do they have any particular vulnerabilities that they're going to need extra support with? Here's your attorney. And there's all sorts of check-ins. Oftentimes the check-ins are in person to make sure that the person is complying with all the release restrictions that the government put on them. So the government can decide what's going to be the safest thing and how can you safely release people to make sure that the kids and families are safe themselves and that they're not posing any danger to the community in which they're going to be released.
Right. And I think all of us as moms who've been home with kids during COVID, and we're antsy about the fact that our kids are getting bored, or there's no places to go, there's no things to do. We're trying to stimulate our kids and release energy and help them still be healthy and safe emotionally, mentally, psychologically during COVID. And we're in the comfort of our own homes and we're feeling stifled. And just imagine sitting in a prison-like facility with a child with little to nothing to do that, even just in the confines of that facility. It's a really stark reality to even try and comprehend.
Look, I sometimes get nervous going to the grocery store these days, right? I mean, everyone's like really heightened and we're all really nervous about this. And so also knowing that I'm locked in a, closed facility with somebody who is sick, right? They're having people have tested positive. It would just be constant terror, but for me and for my kids. Yeah.
Right. So the bottom line about the releasing of these minors is that deadline has come and gone and they have not been released. So what's next step? What are we waiting for? We're waiting for this other judge to help make the prioritization happen of families, or do we know what is happening?
We're gonna, I think in the next few days, we're gonna get a sense of what this other judge about the parents prioritizing. I also think, though, the calls from, constituents to their members of Congress, and Congress really continuing to beat the drum on pushing ICE to just release the families, is probably gonna be quicker and more effective than, these cases. This case has kind of gotten split, and as I explained, kind of stuck with the two different judges in the situation. That, again, priority has to be get them out as quickly as possible and keep them together, right? We know that the government has not done a good job once they've separated of ever putting kids back together. I mean, kind of still serving kids who were separated in 2018 who are not back with their parents yet, So we are terrified at the thought of kids getting separated again because we know the government has not done a good job and prioritized putting families back together again. So really calling and making sure that there's oversight and push on ICE to just release these families into community-based programs so that they can get out and that they're not being asked to separate from their kids.
Right. And I guess, would it be accurate to say that we do have a system? We just talked, Sarah just talked with Jenny Yang the other week, just about, okay, so is the asylum process dead? Is it gone? And she's like, it's not dead. It's just not being utilized. It's kind of sitting dormant. So you have all of these channels and all of these systems that don't have people coming into them right now. And what a sad thing to contemplate when we know we've got people who are willing, equipped, experienced, ready to take in families and to facilitate these community-based systems with families, but instead we're holding them in detention-like facilities. So it's incredibly shocking that that's the case, that we have this, but we're doing this. But then it's also, to me, like mind-blowing. You're still serving children who have not been reunified with their parents since 2018. How many of those kids have still not been reunited?
It is a small number, but what happened is a lot of those parents were separated and they were told, if you accept removal, if you accept deportation and go back to your country of origin, we'll send your kid back with you. That wasn't true, right? So they were sent, they waited till they got on the plane, the kid was never there. The kid's been in their process here in the United States, and then the child has to make the decision, do I go back to be with my parent, even though it's really dangerous, or do I stay here and try to ask for protection? And a lot of the parents are torn. So what KIND has been doing is we've been working with the parents to try to talk to them about, what are their rights as a parent? What are their child's rights? What would the process look like? And then these families kind of have to make decisions about what they're going to do. Does the child stay here and ask, for protection alone, even though their parent went back to country of origin? And these are the conversations that families often have in home country, even before, a kid comes alone or a family comes together. I mean, these are conversations I could never imagine having with my kids, right? Or having to contemplate. So what KIND is doing as attorneys, our job is to make sure everybody understands their rights, everybody understands what the process is, and try to help people make informed decisions about what they're going to do. So
what is the average age of child that you all represent?
Yeah, so the age decreased dramatically, especially during family separations. So, before 2018, the height of the family separation crisis, I would say the majority of our cases were between 10 and 17. The children were between 10 years old and 17 years old. During family separation, there were a lot of toddlers and babies, right, who were separated from their parents. So our average kind of skewed a lot younger. And the other thing is that there were families who were turned around at the border as part of migration protection protocol, a Remain in Mexico program, where they were told, if you want to ask for protection, you have to go wait in Mexico. Unfortunately, it's not safe there. And so there were a lot of kids who were rendered unaccompanied there. Something happened to the parent. They were disappeared. They may have been a victim, of a criminal organization. And then the child was left alone and they came back to the US, went back to the bridge at the border and said, I don't have any food, I'm alone now, now will you process me? And we've gotten a lot of those kids also, and those kids tend to be younger because they were kids who had initially traveled with their parents from the country of origin to the border. So, our average is skewing younger. It's hard to imagine, and you see those little ones, in our offices, and it's hard.
Jen, I'm just thinking, I have a 2-year-old and I have an 8-year-old. And the average age of the kids you're representing, I can't even imagine having that child, my 8-year-old, my 2-year-old, my 2-year-old can't even make decisions about what juice he wants in the morning. How is he supposed to represent his best interest? How is my 8-year-old? I mean, this is why our advocacy matters, and why our advocacy back in 2018, when this was happening, mattered so much. I think we forget that our voice really does make a difference. And so now that we're seeing this family separation, this treatment of children resurface, we've got to start raising the flag again and say, you know what? This is not a partisan issue, in the fact that it doesn't matter who you voted for. Whatever is happening right now is not right. And therefore, we need to hold those who we elected in office accountable and be a voice for these kids and for these mothers and these families that have no voice.
Well, and I think too, people want to know that there's an orderly process, right? Is there an orderly process that exists? Is there a system, or is it like chaos at the border, right? There are a lot of people who've never been to the border, don't know what it looks like. And there's some images I feel like the media puts out that kind of make it seem scary, or you get the sense it's out of control, right? But the truth is there is order. It's not out of control. And there are systems, like there are facilities, there are systems, there are these community-based alternative to detention programs. There are court proceedings to see who really needs protection and who could safely return to their country. What we're asking is to allow people to go through those systems, and let's not harm them in the process, right? Let's not take away their babies or have a kid stuck in a hotel with a stranger, or, kind of common sense. Just allow people to go through the process in a way and make sure the U.S. government isn't doing anything that's really going to harm them. And so I think, really pushing our policymakers and those in charge to say, use the systems that are in the law. We already have all of this. Make sure you're taking advantage of it. That's going to allow for us to really get to the bottom of everybody's story and maintain the orderly system that the U.S. has put in place.
Right, because right now it looks like we're intentionally making policy decisions that intentionally harm people and that are not in their best interest. And I think it's good to just remind the community that those who are in detention right now, they have not broken a law, correct? These are asylum seekers, which is a legal process where there's not some U.S. consulate in the Northern Triangle where you can go and state your case. I mean, you either have to be in country or present at the border in order to, and that's a legal thing. So you can cross without documentation, you can cross illegally to legally apply for asylum. So those who are being detained haven't broken any laws. We're not talking about illegal immigration detention right now. We're talking about asylum seekers who are especially vulnerable, who are seeking safety and protection, who are asking to be vetted at the highest levels of our government, and we're detaining them and treating them in this way, correct?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is people feel like maybe there's an incentive to try to sneak in, but I can tell you for our kids, they have every incentive to just present themselves. They flag down border agents at the border and ask for help. Because right now, when Kind takes a case, like when a kid has a lawyer, we win over 90% of the cases, right? So the incentive is to turn yourself in, comply with the system, because then you will have a life here, right? You'll have legal status, you'll be able to work, right? And nobody wants to be living in the shadows or sneaking around, or there's no incentive to. So if somebody is really coming here, right, asking for help, and we know that's the case because of what's going on in these countries, it's better for them to get into the system because that's going to lead to eventual peace and integration in our communities.
Right. And I think some people are also, we've kind of taken a little tangent here. We're going to get back to what's happening at the border, but I think this is important because it does bring up questions for people in our community as far as those who are being detained. Usually we think if you're in prison or if you're in jail or you're being detained, you've done something wrong. And therefore, sometimes we can be led to believe that those who are being detained are either a safety threat or they're trying to take advantage of the U.S. government and just come in and not be vetted or whatnot. And these are families that are showing up saying, vet me, and I want you to, my claim is legit. And so therefore we have the ability, we have the strongest vetting system in the entire country or in the entire world. And yet somehow there's some narrative out there that vetting system isn't as good as it is, and that it's not, and that people can evade that or trick that system when these families are saying, I want you to check out my story. And those who don't have a legitimate claim are deported. And those who do then deserve our safety and our protection, correct?
Yeah, and this is why KIND runs a return and reintegration program in Central America. So when our lawyers can screen a case, if there's a kid who is like, look, I just wanted to come work for a few years, make some money, and then go back, we can say to them, there's no, legal way for you to do that right now. Let's help you go back, and we'll help you find a job. We'll help you get the education you need so that they can stay in their community and they don't feel like they need to come back. If the kid says, which a lot of our kids do, I actually didn't want to come here. I'm not the type who had like the American dream and wanted to, I had to get out of there. I didn't have a choice. Then we can say, okay, then we're going to help you, with your case, which is why having attorneys is so important, because we can help kids. We can say, you don't have a case, you don't have a way to stay here. You can go back. Let's help you do that. And then really, fret out the ones that need humanitarian protection. I think the other thing I just want to say too, for families and adults, ICE detention can be kind of punitive. It's like, we don't trust you to show up to court, or we kind of want to punish you for coming here asking for help. For unaccompanied kids, there's a different system. It's like a shelter system for kids that's run by Health and Human Services. And that's not really detention. What that is because if you have a 6-year-old, who walks up to Border Patrol and says, I need help, the Border Patrol can't just give her a bus ticket and drop her off at the bus stop and say, all right, go to your cousin in Chicago, good luck, right? We need to make sure the kids are safe. So for the unaccompanied kids, there is a different system run by the Health and Human Services where the kids are in shelters, they get lawyers, they're screened by social workers, and then those people find someone who can take care of the kid, who's a vetted, trusted person, and they do all the vetting, they do criminal background checks to make sure those kids go with somebody safe. So for unaccompanied kids, it's a little bit different of a process. And KIND works in a lot of those facilities to help explain to the kids what their rights are, what their obligations are, so they can figure out what they want to do. So that's a little bit different, and that's more protective for the unaccompanied kids.
That's great, because that really leads into the next question is, and what is actually really happening at the border right now? I think the last time we talked, it was that kids were coming up to the border, they were presenting at the border, and agents were literally saying the border is closed and turning kids back around and saying, go walk back where you came from, which is really concerning because that's a human trafficking vacuum. It also is incredibly harmful when you have no idea if that child has anybody that they're coming back to. You're literally just turning kids around to just say, go walk into the wilderness and find your way. You're not checking on the safety of that vulnerable person, that vulnerable child. So we've heard that, but then we're also hearing these really frightening stories about this shadow system that's being created in some of the border towns, especially, the Associated Press mentioned that some kids are being held in McAllen hotels. And that seems incredibly problematic and frightening. And so I'm just wondering if you could just let us know at the border, what's happening, and who are these kids that are being held in these hotels, and what is the shadow system?
Okay, there's a lot to dig into here. So back in March, right, the CDC said, for health reasons, because of COVID, we need to shut down the border. So their specific order, though, said, so that means kids and asylum seekers can't come in, but we're going to let in truckers, we're going to let in shoppers, we're going to let in people who want to go back and forth and make visits, but we're not going to let asylum seekers and unaccompanied kids come in. And working in this field, we were all confused, where was the analysis that this population provides a greater risk or, isn't as risky as, especially a truck driver, right? Who's probably going to lots of different places. So, at first the reaction was, is this just a way to try to eliminate the system or eliminate them from, asking for protection? So we've done a lot of engagement with public health experts, medical professionals, doctors, pediatricians to really figure out, is there a public health reason why we can't be letting people in to ask for protection? So the short answer is no, there's no reason. There are certainly safe ways to be doing this. And part of what I was talking about before with the system for kids is there's almost like an automatic quarantine process for kids because they go to these shelters. So it's actually probably the safest population to be letting in because they're already set up with medical professionals. It's almost like a built-in quarantining, really, for these kids because they go to these shelters. So, we're concerned about that, but then also the implementation of this. So we were saying, okay, so what does that mean when you're saying the border is closed? So we've been talking to kids who've been turned around, talking to parents, talking to allies who work in Mexico saying, so what's happening when Border Patrol turns around? And it's literally a child walks up, right? And Mexico has said to the US government, we'll take people back that you're not letting in. And we'll take in kids if they're accompanied by somebody. We won't take in a child alone, but we'll take in a kid if they're accompanied by someone. So it used to be a big deal, big screening process that Border Patrol did to make sure that kid was really with a parent or a legal guardian, right? To make sure that was a safe person because of the risk of traffickers and other nefarious people, right? Kind of targeting these kids. So there used to be a lot of checking. I mean, they were doing DNA tests. I mean, there was a lot of scrutiny to make sure that kids were with adults. Since the CDC order, the agents have been saying, oh, look, that kid looks like they're with that adult. Go ahead. And there's nobody in Mexico receiving them. There's no screening on the Mexican side either. They're just being told to walk back across the bridge. There's no shelters in Mexico that are open. There's no child protection, child welfare agencies that are screening the kids when they come back. So, as you can imagine, we're terrified of what's happening to these kids and who they're being turned around with. We don't know who these people are. Is it really their uncle? No idea, because no one's asking either on the US side or the Mexican side. The other thing is that these kids are showing up in really terrible shape. I mean, Bree, my colleague just called me the other day and she said, I'm gonna send you some pictures of kids, these two boys who presented and asked for help at the border and were turned around. She said, I've been doing this work for 25 years and I've never seen pictures as terrible as this. And these are children who had visible injuries. They told the agent, two brothers, they told the agents that they were scared, they needed help, and they weren't safe waiting in Mexico. And the agents still told them around. So the US isn't open for business. And so she called me to warn me before I could even open these photos because they were so horrible. And so the idea of just the humanity of it, these kids, asking for help, and obviously in really dire need. So, there's a lot happening right now that we're really worried about, especially at a time when we know there are safe ways to process these kids. There's no reason for this. If we felt like there really was a reason, there was a well thought out reason, there was a real health reason, right? That would be a different story. But right now, turning kids back to human traffickers or, telling injured children we can't help them is just not acceptable right now. And so what we had kind of been doing, we have a petition where we are asking people to sign so we can push back to the government. We're asking people to call their representatives and say, you have to be letting these kids be processed. There's a way to do it. We can't just be turning our backs on these kids. Now, with this hotel business,
tell me about this, because this is scary. We've gotten a lot of questions about this as far as who are the kids that are in the hotel? Where are they coming from? Who's with the kids, and why are they there? Why is no one allowed to represent? Just all kinds of scary stuff that women are concerned. Who are the kids? Who's with the kids? And what do we know?
Oh my God, it's frightening. It's frightening. So this is what we know, and this has kind of been my life for the past 3 months trying to figure this out because we saw Border Patrol numbers that they were encountering kids, but they weren't making it to the shelters. So for a month, I spent all this time trying to figure out, well, where are they, right? And then we finally realized that ICE is kind of stashing them in these hotels. So what's happening is if ICE has a kid who's alone, remember I said Mexico would take a kid if they're accompanied with somebody. When they have a kid who's really alone, that there really is no adult that they can say, go back to Mexico with, they try to put those kids back on flights, back to their country of origin, whether it's Mexico or Central America.
But wait, just one second, let me clarify. Because you had just said that they're turning kids away at the border. So help me understand, if they're not doing safety checks and they're just simply turning kids away and saying the border is closed. And now you're saying that sometimes they do put them on flights. To me, that means that there's a discrepancy of how different points of entry and different things are handled kids, correct?
Exactly. So look, right, our southern border goes all the way from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas. Things are playing out differently here because there's no consistency, there's no oversight, and they're not following any law. It's just the CDC order, right, which is pretty vague. So we're seeing how things are playing out differently.
Okay.
So in some places, right, if they have a kid who's by themselves and they say, look, this kid's from Guatemala, they're by themselves, I can't push them back into Mexico, but I know we have a flight going to Guatemala next week. There's a deportation flight going next week. Instead of allowing that kid to go through the normal process, right, go to the HHS shelter, talk to a lawyer, get to go to a judge, we're just going to keep them here in this hotel and wait for that flight next week. Sometimes these flights get canceled, right, or they don't have enough people, so it could be 2 weeks, right? There, we found one child who was in a hotel for 19 days, right? So then the next question is, who's in the, if these are unaccompanied kids, who's in the hotel room with them, right? Great question. So Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, they're the government agency, ICE, that they're responsible for transporting these kids or getting them on the flights. They use a contracting firm, right, that does a lot of the driving, getting kids to the airports or to the shelter, wherever they need to go. It's their contractors who are in the hotels with the kids. We don't know what sort of training, if any, they have on child welfare, on best practices in working with children, and there are no oversight rules that apply to kids in hotels, right? There's no, for example, when a kid's in ORR custody, they have to be state licensed, right? So there's licensing standards, who can interact with the kid, that the kid needs recreation, that the kid needs to be able to call their parents, you know, kind of simple, basic standards. Those don't apply in these hotels. There's another law called the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and that's to protect kids from sexual assault when they're in custody. That doesn't apply when the kids are in hotels. So there's, you know, no rules on length of time, who's interacting with those kids. And I can tell you from talking to scared parents who don't know where their kids are, they're not being allowed to call their parents. The kids don't know where they are. And they're certainly not being able to call any attorneys. You know, Kind hasn't had any calls from kids. So it really is like this black hole.
Right. And we've seen pictures from the Associated Press of minors holding signs out of hotel windows that say, I don't have a phone, help me. Which is like, this is happening in the United States of America. Like, I can't even, I guess I'm just flabbergasted as to how this is even happening, and it's continuing to happen.
Well, how it's been able to happen and the amount of work it's taken to find just a handful of these kids. I mean, first we had to figure out that the government was doing this, and then we're trying to find them. So we're talking to everyone we can. We're talking to parents in country of origin. We're talking to organizations, you know, that work on both sides of the border to try to find these kids and figure out how many they are. You know, everyone keeps asking us, how many kids are there? No idea. The government's not reporting it to anybody. How long are they being held in there? No idea. How old are the kids? I don't know. The youngest one we found so far is 1, you know? And so we don't know, you know, we did speak to a child who had been released from one. And the one thing the kid said was that they got McDonald's brought into them. That was kind of the child's the only thing they were kind of forthcoming about what it was like in the hotel or what happened to them. So we're terrified about the safety of kids. And again, Bree, this isn't really an immigration issue, right? This is like a child safety issue. There already is an immigration process for these kids, right? So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry like, well, is anyone going to check them or vet them, or how do we know that they need to stay here? That's not even the issue because we have a system for that already. What we're saying is, don't keep a kid in a hotel room with a stranger without any oversight. You need to put them in the systems that we've set up for them.
It's very scary to think about who is with those children. I mean, how do we know that these aren't people with past offenses, sexual predators, offenders? How do we know that they're, like you mentioned, child specialists, or I mean, who are these people that are watching these children who have no advocate? And I guess what I just want to remind ourselves is if this were, put your child in that hotel room I mean, a lot of us don't even let our children go to birthday parties of friends that they go to school with without us attending the party with them, let alone spend weeks on end in a hotel room with someone that doesn't have any oversight and isn't vetted by anybody that would advocate for their well-being. This is frightening, Jen.
Well, and that there's no government accounting of the kids. We don't know how many. We don't know. No one's going into check. We can't check on them because we don't know what hotels are being used or who's going in there and how long they're there. So the government needs to start answering for this. But the most important thing is Congress already wrote laws, right? There's the trafficking law that lays out what should happen to kids, right? Congress already passed that in 2008. All they need to go back to do is follow the law, follow the procedures that are already in place. So those kids shelters that I was talking about that are run by Health and Human Services, there's over 13,000 empty beds right now around the country. So there are facilities and short-term foster care programs that are open, but just don't have kids in the bed. So this isn't a matter of like, oh, we're being overrun. We didn't know where to stick them. We're going to stick them in a hotel. There are 13,000 open beds around the country right now. There is no reason for a kid to be in a hotel room with a stranger.
Jen, the number one question, like I'm feeling like I'm angry. I'm so angry. Like what can we do? And I think, the number one question we get is when these things come up is what can we do? What can we do? And there's not always a silver bullet to changing things. But in situations like this, there are some really tangible things that we can do. What are those things?
Sure. I mean, I think, us thinking back to those of us who were kind of aware of these issues in 2018 when family separation came up, it's the exact same things, right? It's really raising our voice and letting our elected officials know that these are not our values. Our values are not family separation or endangering children, right? And that we want everybody to follow the law. So what does that mean? That means writing letters, an op-ed to your local paper, having, talking about it with your church, signing Kind's petition, calling your representative. Different people feel comfortable, I think, doing different things. But I think this is a moment, just like family separation, where you can say, look, I don't know all the answers to immigration. It's super complicated. And it seems like there's a process in the law, but we shouldn't be hurting kids in the process, right? That's what I know, and that's what I want stopped. And that's what people were successful doing that in 2018, and we need people to do that again, to really just stand up and say, we can't be turning around kids at the border, and we can't, with a trafficker, and we can't be sticking them in hotel rooms, right? We need to make sure we're processing kids safely. And so as many people who can start speaking up about this in their own different ways, the different points that they have, is going to go a long way.
So I think the easiest thing to probably do would be to just post about it on social, but really probably the most effective thing to do is to call your congressman, correct? Or to call an elected official.
I think both, because I think people are don't know much about this, right? And so even sometimes these conversations, with my friends, they're like, what? What's happening? I don't understand. That can be real. Right, exactly. My mother is like, what? They're in hotels. So first it's even educating our friends in our community so that there's more and more people speaking up. And then you're absolutely right. Signing a petition and calling your members of Congress, it's super easy to do it, right? I mean, I'm a lawyer who works in advocacy, and sometimes I'm intimidated doing it, but it's super easy to do. And they literally count the votes. Our representatives, regardless of what district you're in or what state you're in, they count the phone calls and letters they get to see how many people are calling. And when they get a sense, in family separation, when their phones were blowing up, people saying, whoa, stop taking the babies away from their mothers, they all spoke up about it and really pressure the administration to do the executive order and stop the practice. So that's what we need again. We need that. And I think people feel like maybe it's not going to be effective, or I don't know, I just left a message. I don't know if it made a difference. It really does. I mean, they literally kind of check the numbers on how many people are calling and writing them.
So for someone who has not done that before, it seems kind of intimidating when you're calling or emailing. And it's actually, I think the first time I did it, I felt like I was being a nuisance. I always felt like, well, I mean, surely they know, and I'm just being a nuisance. And it's pretty intimidating. What am I going to say when I talk to the congressman? And I think then after you do it, you're like, oh, that took me 2 minutes and I didn't talk with the congressman. I actually talked to an intern, or I got I got an email back that's very generic that probably didn't do anything. And yet, like you're saying, we know that even even our highest levels of government still tally very traditional communication methods, emails and calls. Emails and calls. Is this hashtag blowing up? Is people talking about this? I'm worried about my reelection. I'm worried about this or that. So what would be the simplest thing to say if calling or emailing? Help us understand how simple that could be.
Yeah, it's so funny you say I'm giving my mom a hard time right now, but the first time my mom called her member, she like emailed me her script. She had spent all this time like writing out this lovely script. I can't remember what it was about. She's like, "What do you think? Do you have feedback?" And I was like, "Mom, literally all you have to do is say, 'Hi, this is my name. I live in this zip code, and I want you to vote no.'" And that's all you have to say. Or, "I want you to speak up about, family separation." That's all you have to do. And, I don't think she believed me until she did the call. And the same thing. It was like a very nice intern or a very nice receptionist who answered the phone and says, "Thank you very much." And they just kind of, mark at their tally. You can tweet at your representative as well. They count those. Believe it or not, those offices still use faxes. So they even count the fax, the faxes. And there's some people who are really active and do it all the time. And look, the people who work in these offices, right, they work for you, right? And they want to please you so that you vote for them again. So their interest is in like being super nice to you and like taking your information. And that's all they're going to do. They're not going to ask questions or push back at all. It's usually, "Thank you very much. We will pass this on to the congressperson." And that usually means, "Hey, we just got 500 calls about this. You better say something, or you better write a letter, or you better pick up the phone and call ICE, and say, 'Hey, get those kids out of hotels,'" right? And that's what's really effective. So again, I'm a lawyer who like does lobbying, and even sometimes I'm intimidated or I'm like, "Oh, I'm too busy to do it." But you can tweet at them, you can call them, you can send a letter, whatever it is, and it can be real short. Usually they just ask for your zip code and to make sure that you're their constituent. And what is it that you're concerned about?
Yeah, and I think what I said when I really took a step back and just thought about what I was really the purpose in which I was reaching out is I just humanized and just said what I felt just in my heart about the situation. I just said it. I just said, "I'm Stensrud." I said my zip code, and I said, "And I am a Christian. I'm an evangelical Christian who is not okay with what is happening to immigrants and refugees and the policies that are seeming to do more harm than good. And I'm very concerned and would like you to get involved." And that's what I said. And then you start to get a little bit more bold in your language, and you get more informed as you start to watch more things or read more things or pay attention. But it can just be as simple as letting them know you've had a gut check and they need to have one too. And what do you think about, should we be calling the White House? Should we be tweeting at the president, or should we just be staying local? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think as much pressure as possible is really good at all different levels, right? Local, federal, to the administration. Because again, all of those officials answer to the American people, right? And they want to take the temperature of the American people. Are the American people really happy about something? Are they really mad, upset about something? Is that something they should prioritize and work on? The most concrete example was family separation. The administration heard loud and clear that nobody was happy with it, right? On any side of the political aisle, like people did not like that, and it was quickly reversed, right? That's what we need again. And these things can happen with a click of a pen. ICE can release the families without separating them. You don't have to change the law, pass a law to do that. They can just do it. Mm-hmm. ICE could say, "You know what? We're going to take all the kids out of hotels tonight. We're going to move all of them into the appropriate children's shelters like they're supposed to be in." That can all just happen immediately, which is why this kind of engagement from you all can be so effective, is because you're not saying like, "Oh, I want you to write this law and then pass it and it has to." No, these are just things that could happen like that. So doing these kinds of calls and tweeting and letter writing is really effective.
What are some of the biggest hashtags that are kind of being used around this narrative right now?
Yeah, so I've seen Free the Families. The legal definition for unaccompanied kids is an unaccompanied alien child. So UAC, so hashtag UAC. Kind's Twitter handle is @supportkind, KIND. So you can kind of see what are the things that the organization is supporting and calling for. But, you know, free them all or free the families and families belong together have been the some hashtags, particularly around the issue around family separation.
Okay. Jen, this is so much and it's so concerning. And just want to thank you so much for all the work you're doing. There's one question I want to ask you before I let you go, and we just have a couple minutes here, and that is, you know, women in our community are always asking what can they do, and we've talked kind of at length about that. The other thing is we have a lot of women who say, you know what, I could be a foster family. If kids need homes, they shouldn't be in hotels. I'm a vetted father, or how do I get involved in foster care to help these kids? I have a loving home. Is that really a solution at this point? Or what are kids really needing? Are they needing foster homes? What would you say to that because that tends to be a question we get asked all the time. These kids are not in safe places. Okay, I've emailed my congressman, I've tweeted at this, but I can show up. Is that something that we're in need of right now? How would you answer that? Respond.
I mean, I love that question. That's so great. I mean, people being willing to like open their home to these kids. I mean, it's so touching and moving. You know, well, I think first off is right now there's no kids getting in. So there aren't any kids, right? There's less than 700 kids even in government custody right now. You know, the vast majority of these kids have someone in the United States that they're already connected with or their family's already connected with, right? It might be somebody from their community who came here 20 years ago and is willing to have the child in their home, and that maintains their family connection. The Health and Human Services does run some short-term foster care programming, so you can get licensed through them. So when kids, you know, when the order's rescinded and kids start coming in, that is a ways to become one of these families that works with the government and might take a child in while they're waiting to be reunified with the family. So those programs, I think, work in about 15 different cities around the country. So you can look and see, you know, is your city one of them? But, you know, there's kids who are being reunified all over the country, right? Especially once, again, the border reopens again. And there's oftentimes churches and schools will do fundraisers for these kids, or they need backpacks or they need school materials. And so tapping into the organizations that are serving these populations in your community, they'll tell you exactly what it is that they need. So it might be they are looking for foster families, or they're like, we really could just use 10 backpacks. You know, we have 10 kids who don't have backpacks. And so you can really figure out what are the needs. So, you know, it could be calling your local KIND office. It could be calling, you know, the local, you know, kind of organization that helps homeless families or recent arrivals in your community. It could be International Rescue Committee. In Michigan, a big program up there is Bethany Christian Services. You know, there's different entities around, so you can figure out who's in your community, call them and ask, because they'll let you know exactly what it is that those kids need in that moment.
That's really good. I mean, we always talk about World Relief has local offices around the country, Lutheran Family Services, Bethany Christian Services. And even if you just simply Google refugee and immigrant services and fill in your state or fill in your city or whatever that may be. So do something national to advocate, and then also do something local and find out what that will be and what that will be needed from you in your local community. So Jen, thank you so much. We love having you, and we thank you for your work. Ladies, if you think about it, please add Jen and the whole support KIND team to your prayer list. They're really doing some heartbreaking work on the front lines of this issue, and they could really be lifted up by all of us. So thank you, Jen. We appreciate you so much.